Hey everyone, tonight we're venturing into something a bit gloomier, a period filled with disease, divine wrath, and questionable soup. We're stepping back into the real life of the Middle Ages. Forget the fantasy of noble knights and glittering castles that Hollywood sold you. The truth is, you'd likely not survive even a single day. So before you get too cozy, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy the kind of content I create. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is right now. It's always cool to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Now go ahead, dim your lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background hum. And let's slowly drift into tonight's story together. Congratulations! You've just opened your eyes in the year 1325. The good part? You're alive. The bad part? So are the fleas. Your bed is a decaying straw mattress, crawling with insects and filled with hay that smells more like a stable floor than anything else. Because, well, it was a stable floor 3 months ago. Forget memory foam, pillows, or even decent sheets. You've got a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't been cleaned since the previous winter. And by now it's about as heavy as a baby cow thanks to layers of filth. You blink as the distant toll of a church bell smashes through the morning stillness. It's the medieval alarm clock, louder, harsher, and even less forgiving. You live in a small wooden shack with one room, no windows, and a lovely, open plan layout where your family, farm animals, and friendly household bugs all bunk together. As for the smell, it's a medley, old beer, human sweat, livestock, and something that you're sincerely hoping isn't mold. But deep down, you know it is. There are no scented candles to cover it up. And even if there were, they just melt right into the dirt floor. You try to stretch out your limbs but instantly regret it. The cold hits you hard, and your joints creak in protest. You're 22, but in medieval terms, that's already middle age. Your back sounds like a warped wooden door, and your knees echo like rocks rattling inside a clay pot. Climbing out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either damp from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof, or crusty with something your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the microbial ecosystem. And privacy? What's that? Your whole family, plus that cousin who never left, is waking up beside you. No bedroom. No curtains. No alone time. Just everyone, always, together. Welcome to mornings in medieval Europe, where solitude doesn't exist, because rodents, bugs, and several other humans are your constant companions. And that's just the beginning. Your day's only getting rougher from here. You've somehow pulled yourself out of your itchy, bug-infested hay pile. Well done. Now nature's calling. And it's not being polite, it's yelling. Here's where you start really missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no roll of paper, no flush. Not even a passive-aggressive plunger lurking in the corner. Back then, relieving yourself was part survival challenge, part public performance. If you're a peasant, your restroom is probably a wooden bucket behind the hut, which is already overflowing because Uncle Wolfstan had a bad run-in with some questionable turnips last night. The stench? Unholy. You hold your breath, finish up. And then, here comes the highlight. You throw it out into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to yell, "Garde à l'eau!" That's Old French for, "Watch out below!" But let's be real, no one moves fast enough. Medieval town roads double as open sewers. A flowing mix of human waste, animal mess, and liquids you don't want to investigate. If you're one of the lucky few in a town with communal latrines, congrats! You get to sit elbow to elbow with total strangers in a stifling outhouse, where privacy is a myth and fresh air is a fantasy. You might have casual conversation, just try not to inhale too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most folks use straw, leaves, bits of cloth, moss, or if they were feeling fancy, a patch of wool. Sometimes, nothing at all. Which might explain why medieval people weren't really into handshakes. Now, if you're thinking that life in a castle had to be better, well, yes and no. You might have had a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your mess straight into the moat. Sounds like a clever solution, until you realize enemy invaders sometimes climbed up that waste chute to sneak in. Yep, that happened. So whether you're a humble farmer or a wealthy noble, using the toilet in the Middle Ages was less a daily need, and more a humiliating ordeal. Cold, cramped, and absolutely unforgettable. Public spaces are risky, and they're always revolting. One wrong step on a slick stone path, and you're face first in yesterday's leftovers from half the village. Oh, and you still haven't even brushed your teeth. Don't worry, we'll get to that delightful detail soon. You survived the toilet ordeal. Surely that earns you a treat? Maybe a warm, satisfying breakfast? Nope. Welcome back to medieval Europe. Nothing here is comforting, especially food. Breakfast, if you dare to call it that, is a depressing experience. There's no eggs Benedict. No whirring coffee machines. Forget about avocado toast. You either sit or squat near a smoky fire, staring into a wooden bowl filled with something that resembles the mud scraped off an old boot. That, my friend, is your daily helping of pottage. A thick, sludgy stew made from whatever scraps you manage to scavenge. Grains, root veggies, maybe a few beans if fortune favors you. This brew has been bubbling for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients simply piled on top of the old. It's less of a recipe and more of an eternal, edible science experiment. Beside it, a hunk of bread so hard you could use it as a shield in battle. It's made from rough rye or barley flour, often padded with sawdust, crushed acorns, or other creative fillers. Because wheat? That's a luxury for nobles and lords. This bread isn't your breakfast buddy. You don't cut it, you negotiate with it. And drinks? You're not sipping on OJ or a frothy oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, at 6 in the morning. Why? Because the water is riddled with filth and tiny parasites. So you start your day with weak ale, low in alcohol, high in survival points. Even kids drink it. No one's thrilled about it. But at least it won't kill you right away. Craving meat or cheese? Dream on. Those are reserved for holy days, saints' feasts, or if your feudal lord feels oddly generous. Most commoners get meat maybe once or twice a year. Fresh fruit? Only when it's in season and hasn't already fermented into crude wine. And spices? Forget it. Unless you're draped in royal robes. A pinch of black pepper costs more than your monthly income. Salt is so precious, it's literally locked up. So you gnaw your rock-hard bread. Gulp your lukewarm medieval beer. And try not to think about whether a rat taste tested your pottage while you slept. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly malnourished, it's time to labor like your existence depends on it. Because it truly does. You've endured your grim morning meal. Now comes the task of getting dressed. Not that it'll make anything better. Your entire wardrobe consists of a single outfit. 1. It's usually a coarse wool tunic or a linen shift, worn day after day, month after month, sometimes for years. Forget about seasons. There's no winter wear or summer collection. Just this one itchy thing until it either falls apart or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, you might own a linen undertunic. If not, you're freeballing it beneath layers of rough, sweaty fabric, lovingly stitched together by someone who probably thought seams were an abstract concept. Also, there's no washing machine, no laundry soap. Dry cleaning? Laughable. Your clothes are stiff-stained and smell like a compost pile that took a detour through a pigsty. And even if you wanted to clean them, it's a whole ordeal. You'd need to haul water from a river or communal well, heat it over a fire, scrub everything with ashes or lye, then hang your rags out to dry, assuming the sun shows up that week. And don't even get me started on shoes, if you're lucky enough to have them. They're probably made from untreated leather, crudely stitched, and provide about as much support as a wet leaf. Most peasants just go barefoot, through mud, through animal waste, through medieval landmines, aka sharp stones, parasites, and mysterious puddles that radiate disease. All of this leads to one conclusion. Your skin loathes you. You're always itching. Fleas, lice, bedbugs. They live on you rent-free. Everyone has them. Even nobles. Even monks. Even little kids. It's normal to scratch your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting up the village priest. Nobody blinks. Your skin is raw from scratching. Your scalp a battleground of insect bites. And if a rash appears, well, too bad. No dermatologist. No ointment. No reassuring doctor to tell you it's probably just scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if it doesn't get infected? Awesome. That rash is now your constant companion. For the next 6 months. Like a medieval sidekick you never asked for. Now that you're clothed in discomfort and officially wrapped in misery, it's time to head outdoors and now begins the real grind. Working yourself into the grave. Fully dressed in itchy wool and soaked misery. You're all set to flash that morning grin. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling isn't just risky emotionally. It's dangerous dentally. Toothbrush? Nope. Toothpaste? Forget it. Mouthwash? Non-existent. Floss? What's that? The very idea of dental hygiene is about as rare as regular bathing. Which is to say, not embraced at all. Some folks gnaw on twigs. A few rinse with wine or vinegar. But mostly, your teeth are abandoned to fend for themselves. And they're losing the battle. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like something unearthed in a cursed tomb. Cavities are widespread. Your gums are swollen and red. Those aren't just stains, that's literal decay. There's more rot in your mouth than in a medieval root cellar. Sugar is still rare, but spreading among the wealthy. Expensive imports, mainly used in small pastries or as a flashy status symbol. If you're noble, congrats. Your teeth can rot twice as fast. If you're poor, don't worry. You'll erode them slowly, chewing gritty porridge and rock-hard bread for years. Toothaches? Get cozy. They're like the Middle Ages version of background noise. Always there, always awful. It's the kind of agony that'll drive you to prayer. Booze, or yanking the tooth out yourself with something that looks like gardening shears. And that's not hyperbole. That was literally the go-to method. Dentists? Not a thing. But hey, the local barber also does dental work. Yes, the same man trimming your bangs by candlelight will gleefully rip out your molar with an iron hook. No numbing. Just steel and screams. Got an infected tooth? Hope you like fevers. Because without antibiotics, that can easily turn into full-blown sepsis. Yes, a bad toothache in the 1300s could straight up kill you. The same issue that sends you to a Walgreens today could be your final chapter back then. And things aren't any better in your love life. Thinking of sharing a kiss? Good luck. Bad breath is as common as fleas. If you're single, nobody's judging your smile. They're evaluating your livestock, your land, and how many chickens you can provide. Your mouth? It's a war zone, and it's losing hard. Now that your teeth are pulsing with medieval rage, it's time to step outside. Because the real job, the one that's going to crush your body, is just beginning. Let's talk about work. No cubicles, no desks, no coffee machines or water cooler gossip, and don't even dream of a promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of people, is brutally simple. Survive while working for someone else's comfort. Congratulations. You're a peasant, which means you labor on land owned by a noble, who probably doesn't even remember your name. You wake with the sun and stop only when darkness swallows the fields. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusted sickle, and whatever bones you haven't shattered yet. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. Just endless daylight. 6 days a week. You get Sunday off. Maybe. But only if you're not harvesting crops, fending off bandits, or begging the heavens to save your toe from turning black and falling off. The work is relentless. Fields are tilled by hand or, if you're rich enough, with oxen. You dig trenches, plant seeds, yank weeds, and lug water until your spine folds like parchment. No one checks in on your feelings. Nobody asks if you're mentally okay. And if you're a woman? Surprise! You don't just farm. You also raise kids, tend the fire, cook every meal, spin yarn, feed livestock, and pretend your husband's lice problem isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. As for kids, they join the workforce around age 5. There's no school, no games, just a small wooden rake, and the dream of not dying from a sneeze this winter. And if you're not farming, great, you're still not off the hook. Maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Awesome. Enjoy spending your days with open fire, harsh chemicals, or animal guts, all inside a shed with zero ventilation. The pay? Just enough to not starve. The benefits? Occasional bleeding and perhaps a new cough. Break a bone? Too bad. Fever? Drink warm beer and keep swinging. Sick day? Doesn't exist. Because if you stop working, you stop eating. And if you stop eating, well, medieval Europe has a quick solution. You die and get replaced. So you clench your splintered shovel. Ignore the pain. And keep going. Because in this world, your job isn't a calling. It's a slow, aching test of how long your body can take abuse before it quits. Now that your back feels like it's been smashed by a cartwheel of bricks. Let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, it's not so much a cycle of seasons as it is relentless punishment from the sky. Let's begin with winter. There's no insulation, no heating system, and absolutely zero weatherproofing. Just creaky wooden walls with gaps wide enough to lob a chicken through. Your windows are just holes covered with cloth, no glass in sight. That cozy hearth? Nice idea, if you had enough firewood to keep it burning, but would cost money. And gathering it from the forest? That can be a death sentence. Yes, picking the wrong stick from the wrong patch of woods can literally get you executed. So you wrap yourself in your one soggy wool tunic, crouch by the faint glow of dying coals, and still wake up with a nose that feels like it's been iced in a freezer. Your feet? Always cold, often wet. Your fingers? Little frostbitten sausages. Frostbite isn't a medical condition here. It's just bad luck. Now let's fast forward to summer. You'd think it's an upgrade. You'd be wrong. Your home transforms into a medieval oven. No fan, no breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your crusty layers. But you can't strip down, because exposing skin is indecent. And also guarantees sunburn, bug bites, and judgmental glances from your neighbors. Flies swarm you, drawn to your unwashed skin and the sour waft of week-old goat stew fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes dance by your ears while you try to sleep. Assuming you can, through the screaming babies and shouting neighbors. Out in the fields, the sun beats down on you like it's angry. No sunscreen. No hat, unless you've desperately woven one from straw like some kind of DIY scarecrow. Worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke isn't a health issue. It's just taking a bad turn. So in winter, you shiver in your drafty hovel and pray your toes survive. And in summer, you sweat through your only pair of socks, while your thighs slowly chafe themselves into medieval dust. And the one constant, no matter the time of year? Your clothes still scratch. Your food still sucks. And your chores are still waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. It doesn't exist. Feeling parched? Want to splash some cold water on your face to jolt out of this fever dream life? Too bad. In the Middle Ages, water isn't your friend. It's trying to kill you, quietly. Let's talk drinking water. The nearby stream might look fresh and sparkly, like it came out of a fantasy film. But spoiler alert, it didn't. Upstream, someone just emptied a chamber pot into it. If not that, then there's likely a rotting pig bobbing in the current. Every drop of water holds more bacteria, parasites, and disease than you can imagine. It's a microbial minefield. Which is why people drank beer. Yes, beer. Even kids. But before you picture medieval toddlers playing drinking games, understand this was small beer. Low alcohol, just enough to make it safer than the filth that ran through the village trench. Brewing required boiling the water, which killed off most of the deaths swimming in it. Wine? Sure, if you're wealthy and don't mind being a little tipsy before breakfast. Now what about bathing? Surely they used water for cleaning, right? In theory? Yes. In practice? Almost never. See, back then, folks believed that washing opened up your pores and let sickness sneak in. That's right, getting clean was seen as medically dangerous. According to medieval logic, you were healthier with a solid, baked-on crust of dirt protecting your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly became centers for gossip, scandal, and full-on extracurricular activities. Naturally, the church noticed and shut many of them down. Too much temptation in a tub, apparently. Even if you wanted to bathe, it was a massive production. Fetch buckets of water from the well. Boil it over fire. Pour it into a wooden tub that leaks. And hope no one used it before you, or worse, right after. Rainwater? It's stored in open barrels, where birds poop, bugs hatch, and moss spreads like wildfire. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's for drinking, washing, or watering your dying vegetables, water in the Middle Ages isn't life-giving. It's a calculated risk. One bad sip, and suddenly you're curled up in a straw bed, sweating out your final hours, while reconsidering every choice you've ever made. So next time you enjoy a clean glass of tap water, raise it high for your ancestors. They didn't drink to stay hydrated. They drank to survive. Maybe it was the water, or maybe it was just that rock you stubbed your toe on, the one shaped like disappointment and despair. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad. You live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is basically polite torture, administered by someone with a theology degree and zero scientific training. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything that ails you, whether it's a cough, rash, shattered limb, or the creeping fingers of the plague, is blamed on your humors being out of whack. According to medieval science, your body is a soup of four substances: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Keep them in balance, and you're fine. Let one get too high, you're doomed. Got a fever? That's too much blood. Solution? Let's bleed you like a stuck pig. They'll either nick a vein with a dull blade or slap some leeches on you until you faint. And who performs this? Often your local barber. Yes, the same guy giving you a trim is also draining your lifeblood into a bowl. It's a 2-for-1 special: haircut and hemorrhage. Feeling depressed? Clearly an overabundance of black bile. The fix? Laxatives. Or maybe a cozy herbal purge. Or, more often, prayer, isolation, and your friends whispering nearby as they measure you for a coffin. Break a bone or suffer a nasty wound? Now you're in real danger. Anesthesia? Not a thing, unless you pass out from pain mid-procedure. Surgery is done with rusty knives that haven't seen soap since the last crusade. Tools are heated, not to disinfect, but to make them look intimidating. Germ theory? Never heard of it. Antibiotics? Centuries away. They believe diseases float in the air, or are punishment from God for your filthy soul. Got a stomach ache? Must have been all that sinful thinking. Time to confess, between rounds of vomiting. If things take a turn for the worse, brace yourself. More leeches, crushed beetles, and a priest at your side, whispering last rites. At this point, everyone's preparing for the only known permanent cure, death. And if by some miracle you do recover, they don't thank the treatment. They assume divine mercy stepped in. Your doctor claims all the credit, and the leech gets a promotion. So yes, medicine in the Middle Ages wasn't about healing. It was surviving the cure. After a long day of sweating, scratching, and slowly leaking blood, you finally trudge home, stomach rumbling, dreaming of the one comfort left: a hot meal. Bad news. Your dinner might be trying to kill you too. Let's cover the basics. Food preservation doesn't exist. There's no fridge, no freezer. Only salt, smoke, or the desperate hope that winter air keeps it fresh. Meat, if you somehow have it, has likely been hanging for days, covered in flies, soaked in questionable brine. and possibly nibbled by a rat that beat you to it. Bread is the foundation of your diet. But even that is dangerous. During bad harvests, desperate families pad it out with bark, sawdust, even clay. Yes, clay. And if it's rice season? Congratulations, you might get ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations, seizures, and death. It's like eating bread spiked with LSD and tetanus at the same time. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or dumped into the never-ending pot of pottage. That same stew your great-grandfather probably died next to. Fruit might show up in autumn, but it rots quickly. And sugar? Forget it. It's expensive, imported, and hoarded by the rich to display their blackened teeth like trophies. Dairy is another roulette. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese last longer. But they're teeming with bacteria. Still, people eat them, because it's either that or gnaw on your shoe. As for flavor, spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg cost more than your house. The average peasant seasons their meal with onions. Don't get too comfortable, because God's watching. So is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely tattle if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls everything. Your calendar, your laws. Your education, if you even get one. Your birth, marriage, death. And everything in between. Think of the church as your spiritual landlord. One who's always demanding payment. And never, ever forgives late rent. Each day is built around prayer bells. The church tower rings morning, noon, and night. Not to remind you, but to warn you, missing prayer is a sin. Forget to kneel? Sin. Eat meat on Friday? Sin. Have one weird dream about your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And yes, hell is very real. Not abstract. Not metaphorical. We're talking full cinematic horror. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood. Demons with forks, and screams forever echoing in the abyss. If the Black Death doesn't scare you, damnation surely will. You can't even read the Bible yourself. It's in Latin, a language for monks, priests, and that one noble kid who never has to shovel mud. So you rely on the priest to tell you what it means. And if he says your crops failed because you didn't pray enough, well, time to double down on the genuflecting. Tithes? They're not optional. 10% of everything you own. Grow wheat? Hand over wheat. Have chickens? Eggs. Own nothing? Congrats. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially ruined. Holidays? Oh, they exist. But they're not vacations. They're holy days, designed for Mass, fasting, and guilt. You might get out of fieldwork, but not out of confession. Enjoying yourself is borderline heresy. And questioning the church? Don't even think about it. Heretics are burned. Suspected witches? Drowned. Blasphemers? Whipped. And doubters? Well, they get corrected. So you go along with it. You chant. You kneel. You pray that your dirt-covered, exhausted soul might someday reach paradise. Assuming the priest gives the thumbs up. Because in medieval Europe, God may be forgiving, but his staff? Not so much. And if you thought living like this was tough, try doing it as a woman. Take all the filth, hunger, and hopelessness. Then add childbirth, silence, and being invisible. Being a woman in the Middle Ages. is like playing on nightmare mode, with no health potions, and no restart button. From the moment you're born, your path is set. Marry young, bear children, obey your husband, and die tired. Education? Maybe, if you're lucky and born noble. Otherwise, your learning stops once you can churn butter and patch holes in someone else's tunic. Marriage? It happens young. Really young. You might be engaged by 12. Pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, goats, and family deals. Your opinion? Not required. Once you're married, you belong to your husband. Your job. Pop out airs, cook meals, keep house, and definitely don't complain, or risk being labeled a nag, or worse, a witch. And that's not just name-calling. That label comes with a bonus prize. Drowning or burning, whichever your village prefers. Childbirth? A total gamble. No prenatal care. No sterilized tools. No painkillers. Midwives do their best. But even a simple complication could end you, your baby, or both. Some women live through 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive too. And if you do make it, congrats. Now you've got a screaming infant in a flea-ridden hut. And you're expected to breastfeed, clean, cook, and still help plow the fields. You don't get to take a break. You are the break. For everyone else. If you're single, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're exposed. If you speak your mind, you're dangerous. Women who don't follow the script often find themselves accused of witchcraft, especially if they know herbs, speak too boldly, or just make eye contact on a cloudy day. Even in religion, your place is limited. Nuns live under strict silence. They can't leave the convent. They can't speak without permission. And even in God's eyes, your spiritual value is considered secondary, just behind every single man in the room. So to be a woman in medieval Europe, it's to live a life of endurance, obedience, reproduction, and silence. And through it all, you're expected to endure it gracefully, ideally with a polite smile. Because even in an age of universal misery, women were somehow expected to suffer beautifully. By now, you've battled grime, hunger, injustice, and maybe even a goat. But just when it seems your day couldn't possibly get worse, enter violence. Loud, bloody, and totally normalized. Let's make something clear. The Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant pray your local lord isn't in a bad mood. Violence was everywhere. In homes, in markets, in battlefields, in churches, even in line at the communal bread oven. Crime? Common. Punishment? Brutal. Justice? Less protection, more theatrical horror show. Steal a loaf of bread? You might lose your hand. Accused of lying? Enjoy a pierced tongue. Gossip too much? Meet the scold's bridle. A metal mask strapped over your head with a mouth bar to keep your opinions nicely sealed. Correction, of course. Now, let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy. Witchcraft. Theft. How do you prove your innocence? Simple. You're tortured. Welcome to trial by ordeal. In one version, you dunk your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If your hand miraculously heals in 3 days without infection, congrats, you're innocent. If not, guilty. Sorry. Another favorite? you're tied up and tossed into a river. Sink, you're innocent and dead. Float, guilty. Prepare for punishment. It's basically a medieval game show, where survival is the prize, and the host is actively rooting against you. If you're sentenced to death, it becomes a public spectacle. Executions are open-air entertainment. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. People bring snacks. It's the Middle Ages version of a Saturday night out. Domestic violence? Totally normal. Husbands were not only allowed, but often expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights? Everywhere. You could be assaulted for looking sideways at a noble's horse. And war? Always simmering. Local feuds, territorial spats, religious crusades. There's always someone marching off to stab someone else. In the name of God, glory, or boredom. Violence wasn't a collapse of order in the Middle Ages. It was the order. A few whispered prayers and a shallow mound of earth. If there was still space left in the crowded churchyard. So yes, in the Middle Ages, life was nasty, short, and always under siege. By death in one of its many casual forms. There was no retirement. You didn't stop working. You just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's wrap up your day with the final act. The slow, inevitable collapse of the medieval dream. How's your day been? You woke up in filth. Relieved yourself into a bucket. Brushed your teeth with wishful thinking. Nearly fainted from hunger. Worked until your spine begged for mercy. Itched through layers of unwashed wool. Prayed not to get the plague. And narrowly avoided being executed over a squirrel. Welcome to a typical day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romantic image of the Middle Ages. Chivalrous warriors, noble ladies, candlelit banquets, and glorious battles. It's a fairy tale. Reality? The medieval world was raw, ruthless, and completely unfair. Social hierarchy was carved in stone. Born poor? You stay poor. Born rich? Congrats. You might live a little longer, but you're still one bad oyster away from dysentery and a dirt-covered grave. Even nobles weren't immune. Their grand castles? Cold, smoky stone boxes filled with rats, fleas, and unhappy marriages. Sure, you had wine and fur, but you also had a 50-50 chance of dying in a dumb skirmish, or from an infected splinter. So no, these weren't simpler times. They were relentless times. Everything was harder. Everything took longer. Everything hurt. Even basic things, like giving birth or chewing your dinner, could end in disaster. Life wasn't lived for leisure. It was endured. And if, by some miracle, you found a moment to dream, to imagine something beyond your station, there wasn't much you could do with it. No climbing the social ladder. No healthcare. No Google to ask, is this rash fatal? You were born, lived, and died, within 10 miles of the same muddy spot. And yet, somehow, people still laughed. They sang. They fell in love. They told stories. They found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they found a way to light a candle. So tonight, when you curl up in your clean bed, with indoor plumbing, painkillers, and central heating, maybe take a second to be quietly grateful for the modern world and for your ancestors who braved rats, famine, superstition, and leeches. so you wouldn't have to. She converted to Orthodoxy, adopting a new name, Ekaterina Alexievna. Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and irreversible. This wasn't just a religious conversion. It was a rebirth. A burning of bridges behind her. As she stepped into a foreign empire with no map back home. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have guessed what was coming. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, empire. But from the moment Sophie entered the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began plotting how to become a queen. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her future among Russia's elite. But from the start, it felt more like a prison than a throne. Peter, the heir to the Russian Empire, was no fairy tale prince. He was awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He spent more time waging pretend wars in his chambers than learning how to rule or showing any warmth to his bride. Some sources even suggest the marriage remained unconsummated for years. Peter idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and openly resented the Russian court that had adopted him. Catherine, on the other hand, embraced Russia with fierce resolve. She studied the language, devoured its history, and memorized every Orthodox ritual. She didn't just want to be accepted, she wanted to belong. Peter wanted out. Catherine dug in. This wasn't just a mismatch of personalities. It was a clash of visions. The Russian court was a snake pit of paranoia, power plays, and whispered betrayals. Empress Elizabeth still reigned, absolutely, but her health was fading fast. Everyone knew change was coming. Everyone had a plan. Everyone was watching. Catherine lived under constant surveillance. Her letters were opened. Her conversations were reported. Even her servants were potential spies. She couldn't trust her husband. Her mother, who still pulled strings for German interests, or even her reflection. One wrong word, one false step, and she could vanish like so many before her. But Catherine wasn't naive. She studied the court's cruelty and learned to survive in silence. She quietly forged alliances, flattering military officers, befriending intellectuals, and gaining a reputation for calm dignity. A perfect counterpoint to Peter's tantrums, an open disdain for all things Russian. Behind closed doors, Catherine began devouring Enlightenment texts, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and more, while others saw a young foreign consort. She was building a blueprint for a stronger, smarter Russia, a nation of learning, order, and reason. But there was one obstacle: Peter. As long as he lived, Catherine remained trapped, a powerless wife to a man unfit to wear a crown. So she waited, watched, planned. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be taken. And in 1762, after almost 2 decades of quiet maneuvering, her moment came. Empress Elizabeth died. Peter, now Peter III, took the throne, and almost immediately his rule collapsed. Within weeks, he alienated the church, infuriated the nobility, and insulted the army. He fawned over Prussia, Russia's old enemy, undid key policies, humiliated Orthodox clergy, and bragged openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court grew cold. The military muttered. Even ordinary Russians, deeply devout and nationalistic, saw him as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine watched it all, then made her move. That July, while Peter vacationed at his summer estate. Catherine staged a bloodless coup, supported by loyal officers, including her lover Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers. She rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial dress, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and quickly won over the elite imperial guard. Peter, caught completely off guard and isolated, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody, and not long after, found dead under suspicious circumstances. Officially, a sudden, unexplained illness, hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, assassination. Catherine was now empress, not by birth, not through marriage, but by will, intelligence, and fearless execution. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman had taken one of the most powerful thrones in the world, by sheer force of ambition. She had no legitimate claim to the Russian throne. No royal bloodline, no inheritance, no mandate. And yet she took it, without a single battle. But claiming the crown was just the beginning. Her true test was transforming that bold power grab into a lasting legacy. Would the Russian people accept her? Would the nobles obey her? Could she hold an empire together without meeting the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood something crucial. Power taken through whispers and shadows could vanish just as quickly. So she set out not just to rule as a schemer, but to redefine herself as a visionary. It was the start of her greatest transformation. From careful conspirator to reforming empress. A ruler who would redraw the map, embrace the Enlightenment, and change what it meant to be a woman on the throne. Once she had the crown, Catherine could have sat back and enjoyed her triumph. But that was never the plan. She had bigger dreams. Not merely to reign, but to remake Russia. Not just through armies or treaties, but through the power of ideas. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and played with toy battalions, Catherine looked to Voltaire, Diderot, and the radical thinkers of her time. She believed in reason, in progress, in the monarch not as a tyrant, but as a steward of the people, even while she herself ruled with unquestioned authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy. She lived it. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, lavishing him with praise. While defending her grip on absolute power, she invited Diderot to her court, bought his entire library, and funded his work behind closed doors. She studied law, debated policy, and drafted reform. Early in her reign, she launched an ambitious initiative, the Legislative Commission of 1767, a bold attempt to overhaul the entire Russian legal system. Her personal document, the Nakazor, instruction, was more than guidance for lawmakers. It was a hidden political treatise. It spoke of equality before the law, condemned torture, and reimagined the ruler as a servant of the people. For 18th century Russia, it was revolutionary. But ideals don't live in ivory towers. They face the hard ground of reality. Russia was vast, feudal, and deeply conservative, ruled by nobles who liked their peasants exactly where they were, beneath them. Catherine understood this, so she tread carefully. She eliminated some forms of torture, expanded secular education, and ordered the construction of schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's iron control over their serfs, a compromise to keep the aristocracy on her side. This was Catherine's dance. A philosopher queen in public, a political realist behind the scenes. She walked a tightrope, balancing Enlightenment ideals with autocratic necessity, Parisian salons with Moscow politics. Her vision wasn't to make Russia European. It was to make Russia modern, on Russian terms. She believed in reform, but delivered it with an iron hand, wrapped in a velvet glove. And Catherine didn't just want to reform from within. She wanted to expand outward, to shape an empire that others would envy, fear, and respect. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine planned to tear down the walls entirely. Under her reign, Russia's borders grew wider than ever before. She didn't fight just to defend her crown. She fought to redraw Europe. One of her most significant campaigns, her wars with the Ottoman Empire. Throughout the 1760s and 1770s, Russia clashed with the Ottomans in a series of fierce conflicts. But these weren't just land grabs. They were ideological. Catherine saw herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, the rightful leader of Eastern Europe. Under brilliant generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia seized critical territories: Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and finally access to warm water ports, a strategic dream for generations of Russian czars. But these victories were more than military, they were symbolic. Each conquest declared that Russia was no longer the distant, frozen outsider of Europe. It was now a continental superpower. Catherine didn't stop there. She turned west. Through a series of calculated deals and political maneuvers, she helped orchestrate the partitions of Poland, carving up the dying Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with Austria and Prussia. By the time the final partition was complete in 1795, Poland had been wiped from the map entirely. Russia was swelling. Vast new territories, millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies. She colonized with ideas. New towns rose from raw earth. Trade routes expanded like veins across the empire. German settlers were welcome to cultivate barren lands and inject innovation into Russian agriculture. The empire transformed into a sprawling mosaic, from the frozen Baltic coasts to the golden shores of the Black Sea. At the center of it all, Catherine. She read every report, issued orders with precision, and personally oversaw the shaping of this ever-growing domain. Critics accused her of being ruthless, hungry for conquest, imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition. It was inevitable. A truly great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by intellect, but by the reach of her borders. She didn't just want to rule Russia. She wanted to remake it as a cultured, enlightened empire, feared by enemies, respected by neighbors, and loyal only to her. But while her policies and conquests built her public image, her private life built her legend. And not all of it involved philosophy books. Catherine's romances were infamous. Not one or two lovers, but a carefully selected procession of them. Often young, always attractive, sometimes influential. She didn't hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with estates, titles, pensions, if they played their roles well. If they didn't, they were politely dismissed, sometimes with a handshake and a generous promotion. Among the most notable was Grigory Potemkin, a man as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred all lines. Lover, advisor, co-sovereign. Some historians believe they even married in secret. Together, they reshaped southern Russia. Military campaigns, colonization, infrastructure. Potemkin wasn't just a favorite. He was her second self in governance. Still, Europe couldn't see past the gossip. Whispers grew. Satirical pamphlets mocked her as insatiable, dangerous, deranged. And after her death, the stories got even worse. The most vile? A fabricated, grotesque myth involving a horse. A smear campaign designed by enemies to tarnish her memory. Why the obsession? Simple. Catherine ruled with no apologies. And in a world where powerful women were expected to be saints or tragedies, she refused to be either. She ruled, loved, and lived on her terms. That made her powerful. That made her threatening. Ironically, while her critics called her immoral, Catherine held a deeply philosophical view on love and pleasure. She believed intimacy was natural, that relationships didn't undermine leadership. She kept her emotions and her policies separate, a skill few male rulers ever mastered. In truth, her lovers were often strategic, loyal, capable, politically useful. And when they outlived their purpose, she let them go, usually with grace and a generous retirement package. Her romantic life didn't weaken her. It was part of her power play, a mix of affection and authority that made her unforgettable, admired, and feared. But no reign is without threat. In 1773, that threat took the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelian Pugachev. He wasn't just another rebel. Pugachev claimed to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's supposedly dead husband. He said he had survived the coup and returned to reclaim his throne from the German usurper. It was a lie. Peter was long dead. But truth didn't matter to Russia's worn-out, overtaxed lower classes. The claim didn't need to be factual. It just needed to offer hope. Pugachev promised liberation, freedom from serfdom, lower taxes, land for the people. And that was enough to ignite a fire. His promises spread like wildfire across the Volga region, among Cossacks, peasants, and religious dissenters, in a nation where the divide between nobles and serfs had become a yawning chasm. His words sounded like salvation. The Pugachev rebellion exploded, the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns fell, fortresses collapsed, noble families were slaughtered. For a brief and terrifying moment, it looked like the empire might splinter from within. Catherine was rattled. This wasn't some foreign war she could fight with treaties and cavalry. This was a domestic firestorm, lit from within, by the very people she ruled. He rose against the very system she ruled. But Catherine didn't flinch. She acted. She dispatched professional soldiers to crush the rebellion with precision and force. By 1774, Pugachev's revolt was over. His forces were scattered, his uprising dismantled. He was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and publicly executed in Moscow. His severed head a chilling message to anyone who dreamed of revolution. Afterward, Catherine didn't turn toward the people. She turned inward and tightened control. Her once lofty ideals of liberating the serfs were quietly laid to rest. Pugachev's rebellion revealed something Catherine could no longer ignore. Enlightenment alone could not govern a land still chained by feudalism. So she leaned more heavily on the nobility, offering them greater power over their serfs, in return for unwavering loyalty. This was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized order over ideals. Reforms slowed. Surveillance increased. And whispers of rebellion were to be silenced before they had a chance to breathe. Pugachev lost his head, but he left a lasting warning that haunted her. Power built on inequality is always balancing above a storm. By the time Catherine neared the end of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 34 years, longer than any woman in the nation's history. From the moment she seized power, she defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and rewrote the rules for what a monarch and a woman could be. Under her reign, Russia became a true continental force. Its borders expanded by over 200,000 square miles, absorbing Crimea, parts of Poland, and the coveted Black Sea coastline. These were more than military victories. They were strategic masterstrokes, gaining warm water ports, controlling new trade routes, and asserting Russia's place on the global map. But Catherine's legacy wasn't only drawn in ink on maps. It was etched into culture, art, and education. She founded the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of Europe's greatest private art collections, and maintained correspondence with the brightest minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a center of elegance, intellect, and ambition. In a country often dismissed by Western Europe as backward, Catherine made culture a weapon of modernization. She opened schools for girls, championed the spread of printed books, and introduced smallpox inoculation, even famously receiving the vaccine herself. It was a bold act of scientific leadership at a time when kings and queens feared the needle more than the plague. Yet her reign was filled with contradictions. She admired Enlightenment ideals, but she never freed the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom deeper into Russia's growing frontier. Her reforms, while remarkable, were often top-down, meant to modernize the empire's image, not overhaul its roots. Still, Catherine brought a rare combination of stability and ambition. She understood that real power is not simply inherited. It's built, guarded, and constantly recalibrated. She ruled not by divine right, but by force of will, political brilliance, and tireless effort. She was called many things: usurper, tyrant, reformer, seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was richer, stronger, and more influential than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secured, an empire stretched, and a myth that would echo for generations. Catherine didn't merely reign, she ruled, with intellect, with calculation, and with a fearless grip on history. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a legend. For all her triumphs and conquests, Catherine the Great was still, at her core, a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. Behind the portraits, beneath the polished court rituals, was someone deeply aware of how precarious her power truly was. She was not born Russian. She took the throne by force. She ruled a nation that never wanted a woman in command. And yet, she didn't just survive. She thrived. Catherine refused to be ornamental. She read obsessively, wrote constantly, and never stopped learning. Her daily routine was punishing. Hours spent reading state documents, writing to foreign leaders, editing laws, and maneuvering among court rivals. She didn't simply sit on the throne. She worked it like a sovereign sculptor shaping a nation. And for all her grandeur, she was often profoundly lonely. Surrounded by courtiers, advisors, lovers, and artists, she confessed in her memoirs that she could trust very few. Her son, Paul, whom she never fully trusted and kept distanced from governmental affairs, matured into someone she feared might dismantle everything she had worked to build. Her most profound emotional bond, with Gregory Potemkin, transitioned over time into a strong friendship, but his passing in 1791 left a sorrow that never quite faded. Catherine was deliberate in shaping her public persona. She grasped the immense power of storytelling and wielded it more effectively than nearly any ruler of her time. She fashioned herself as the nurturing matriarch of Russia, a beacon of enlightenment, a battle-hardened sovereign, and a patron of the arts. But beneath those grand titles was a woman who had weathered abandonment, deceit, scandal, and uprisings, and still pressed on. By the time she died in 1796, she had reshaped an entire empire, but left behind lingering doubts. Could she have truly dismantled serfdom? Did her philosophical beliefs fall victim to political reality? Was she more a visionary reformer or simply a shrewd ruler? History gave her a title she never claimed for herself: the Great. Not because she was flawless, gentle, or fair, but because she seized authority and exercised it on her terms, in a world where women were expected to have none. She didn't merely wear the crown, she redefined what it meant to earn it. Deep in the humid jungles of Chiapas, in southern Mexico, the ancient ruins of Palenque still echo with whispers of the Maya civilization. Stone temples rise above the trees, their carved facades weathered by centuries, yet still rich with untold stories. And in 1994, one of those secrets emerged. A team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was studying Temple 13, a rather modest pyramid beside the famed Temple of the Inscriptions, the tomb of King Pacal the Great. The throne temple wasn't expected to yield much until they discovered something unusual: a sealed and hidden room beneath the structure. No tomb robbers had ever disturbed it. It was untouched. When the archaeologists broke through and descended into the chamber, they found a stone coffin resting in absolute stillness. The air inside was thick with centuries of silence. When the lid was opened, a burst of crimson dust rose into the air, striking vibrant red. The sarcophagus was coated in powdered cinnabar, a mercury-based mineral used by the Maya for sacred rites. Inside that scarlet haze was the skeleton of a woman. She had been laid to rest with great dignity and honor. Her bones were delicate but whole, her skull still adorned with a jade funerary mask, and her remains surrounded by elegant offerings, necklaces, crowns, and heirloom ornaments crafted from jade and shell. Everything about the scene suggested royalty. Yet there was no name, no glyphs to say who she was. It was one of the richest female tombs ever found in Mesoamerica, and yet it was a mystery. Why the red dust? Who was she? A queen? A high priestess? Maybe even Pacal's consort? Archaeologists dubbed her the Red Queen, and the name endured. But even with advanced scientific methods, her true identity remained unknown. They could only determine that she had lived in the 7th century, during Palenque's golden age. Her tomb, unlike most Maya burials, had been carefully concealed and deliberately set apart. This was no ordinary interment, it was deeply spiritual. This woman was not meant to be remembered by name, but through sacred ritual, through vivid color, and through the lingering enigma she left behind. The most chilling element of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't the jade relics, nor the eerie silence inside. It was the red dust. A thick coating of powdered cinnabar blanketed the sarcophagus, the chamber walls, her bones, and every sacred item near her. It clung like blood soaked into stone. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar, made from ground mercury sulfide, was both revered and hazardous in their world. Its brilliant red hue was more than eye-catching. It symbolized blood, rebirth, and the spiritual energy that connected people to the gods. Red was a sacred color. It represented sunrise, sacrifice, and life rising from death. And it wasn't merely decorative, it held immense spiritual significance. Coating the dead in cinnabar was a sacred act of transformation. Her body wasn't preserved for eternity, but rather prepared for passage. In Maya belief, death wasn't the end, it was a gateway, a crossing into a different cosmic dimension. So, whoever the Red Queen truly was, her burial was not merely about honoring the dead, it was about preparing her for divinity. But there's a deeper element to this. Cinnabar is poisonous. Long-term exposure can result in mercury poisoning, causing trembling, hallucinations, even fatal outcomes. The Maya likely didn't grasp the chemistry behind it, but they sensed its raw energy. It was unstable, potent, even dangerous. To envelop a body in it was to make a statement. This individual was far from ordinary. In Palenque, very few received such treatment. Paco the Great, the powerful king whose grand tomb dominates the site, was one of them. His remains, like hers, were soaked in cinnabar. That parallel alone has fueled speculation. Was she his queen? His mother? Or someone else of matching sacred significance? Her skull had been carefully placed atop jaguar hide, another revered symbol in Maya culture. All around her were ceremonial objects, bone pins, sharp obsidian tools, and tiny jade figurines, suggesting rituals done either during her life or to honor her in death. Every artifact told a wordless tale, a tale of influence wrapped in mystery. This woman wasn't entering the underworld in silence. She was escorted there in ritual, cloaked in the color of sacrifice. Around her vivid red remains lay a world hushed in reverence, interrupted only by the glint of jade, shell, and obsidian. These weren't decorations. They were sacred items, each chosen deliberately to accompany her into the afterlife, known as Zabalba. Jade necklaces lay beside her, cold, polished, and still gleaming after 1,300 years underground. Jade, to the Maya, was not just precious, it was sacred. It symbolized eternal life, the lush green of maize, the breath of the forest, and the divine energy of the gods. Only the elite were adorned with it in death. For the Red Queen, jade covered her chest, wrists, and ears, evidence of her elevated status, perhaps even divine favor. Among the most striking objects was the jade funerary mask laid gently over her face. Unlike the gleaming gold masks of Egyptian kings, this one was subtle, crafted from dozens of tiny tiles fitted together to resemble her own features. The mask had sacred meaning. It was meant to safeguard her soul, to preserve her identity, and to present her to the gods as divine. Near her bones were bone-sewing tools, obsidian knives, and shell ornaments, likely either ritual instruments or indicators of her spiritual or political authority. One bone pin bore faint carvings, deliberate, though barely visible, a whisper of her voice echoing across centuries. At her feet and along the tomb's edges, sealed ceramic vessels were discovered. These were likely filled with offerings, meals, drinks, or incense to nourish her soul during the long and perilous journey through the afterlife. The Maya believed that death was not restful. It was a dangerous voyage filled with trials. These items weren't decorative. They were essential for survival beyond death. To modern eyes, the tomb feels deeply personal. It isn't overwhelmed by luxury, but rather grounded in purpose. There's no gold, no ornate thrones, no over-the-top displays, only objects carefully chosen for their spiritual weight. It's a spiritual roadmap. Through these relics, we catch a glimpse of how the Maya viewed death, not as an end, but as a passing of power. The Red Queen was not interred to be forgotten, she was being elevated. And yet, for all the ceremonial grandeur of her tomb, one haunting absence remains: a name. No inscription marked her sarcophagus. No glyph on the walls proclaimed her identity. She was clearly a figure of immense significance. But who was she? Since the moment her tomb was opened, scholars have worked to solve the puzzle. The most compelling theory? That the Red Queen was none other than Tiziakbu Ajah, the wife of Kinich Janab Pakal, known to history as Pakal the Great, Palenque's most revered ruler. Tiziakbu wasn't just a royal spouse. She was born into a noble house and married into the ruling dynasty of Palenque at a young age. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, each of whom rose to prominence, and she played a prominent ceremonial role alongside her husband throughout his rule. The fact that she was laid to rest so close to Pakal's own grand tomb within the Temple of the Inscriptions strongly implies significance. It wasn't just convenient placement, it was a purposeful alignment, a union in death, just as they may have been united in life as sovereign partners. Then there's the cinnabar. Only 2 tombs in all of Palenque were discovered with such heavy use of this red mercury-based substance, Pakal's and the Red Queen's. That's unlikely to be chance. But here's where the puzzle deepens. Scientists performed DNA testing on both sets of remains, hoping to confirm a familial tie. The outcome? Inconclusive. The woman's bones did not show a maternal relationship with Pakal, meaning she wasn't his mother, but this didn't disprove the theory of a marital link. After all, marriage doesn't require shared blood. Some researchers have proposed that she might have been Sak-Kuk, the powerful mother of Pakal, who ruled as queen regent before he was old enough to ascend the throne. Others speculate she could have been a royal priestess, a sister, or an important matriarch from the royal family whose name has faded from history. Yet the strongest evidence still leans toward Tiziakbu Ajah, a queen by marriage, mother to kings, and deeply connected to Palenque's spiritual and dynastic foundations. The absence of her name may not have been a mistake. It might have been deliberate. In Maya thought, remembrance didn't always require writing. Identity could survive through ritual, symbols, and the whispers of sacred earth. And so, the Red Queen exists in that liminal space, between myth and fact. A sovereign woman, not etched in stone but embalmed in crimson silence. To understand her story, we must understand the civilization she belonged to. Maya culture often granted royal women more authority than people think. Politics in the Maya world was often a family enterprise. Women of noble blood weren't passive figures, they were active forces. They weren't just queens, they were priestesses, advisors, even commanders. They officiated religious rites, funded temples, and legitimized dynasties. Their genealogies were tools of diplomacy, binding families, solidifying claims to rule. Look at Sak-Kuk, for example. She wasn't just Pakal's mother, she was a ruler. When Palenque's throne stood empty, she didn't step aside, she stepped up. As regent, she issued commands, managed construction, and held authority in her own name. Without her leadership, Pakal's rise might never have occurred. And she wasn't unique. Across the Maya cities, Yaxchilan, Naranjo, Calakmul, there's evidence of women performing sacred rituals, participating in political decisions, and even leading as monarchs. They're depicted in carvings, murals, and glyphs, wearing elaborate regalia, standing alongside kings, sometimes surpassing them in stature. Their words were once carved into stone, their names preserved, until conquest and time buried them. By the time Spanish colonizers arrived, these stories were nearly erased. Their worldview saw native women as voiceless. But archaeology tells another tale, one of shared power and fluid roles, where leadership wasn't limited by gender alone. And it's within this cultural backdrop that the Red Queen's life and death takes on new depth. Maybe she never ruled officially, but her richly adorned tomb, the ceremonial symbols, and her position beside Pal point to her being a keystone in Palenque's power structure. The jade mask that veiled her face was more than an artistic flourish, it was an emblem of authority. Her lineage may have been the very scaffolding upon which Palenque's royal legacy was built. In the Maya worldview, a queen wasn't merely the consort of a king. She was the guardian of sacred bloodlines, a voice in sacred rites, a vessel for divine messages. Though she remains nameless in stone, the Red Queen was never voiceless in her own time. Her burial wasn't just surrounded by objects, it was enveloped in purpose. Layer after layer of sacred meaning shaped her final resting place. This wasn't simply a tomb, it was a cosmic passageway. Her body was discovered inside Temple 13, a smaller pyramid nestled in Palenque's ceremonial center. But what made its position notable was how close it stood to Temple of the Inscriptions, where Pakal the Great lay buried. That nearness wasn't accidental. Maya architecture followed celestial rhythms, mythological principles, and dynastic design. Temples weren't dropped into place. They were calculated symbols of heritage and cosmic alignment. Though it stands beside a grander monument, this temple guards something far more personal. A sealed chamber, untouched by thieves, and left completely intact. It was built deep within the structure, reachable only through a steep and narrow stairway. Descending into this hidden crypt feels less like a step into history, and more like a symbolic plunge into the realm of the dead. The tomb itself is simple, constructed from cut stone and sealed tightly for over 11 centuries. No glyphs grace the walls. No carved murals relay the story of its occupant. But perhaps that absence of narrative is deliberate. This was never meant to be a space for the living to interpret, but a realm where the dead could undergo transformation. At the center rests a stone coffin, placed like a sacred altar, made from limestone. Its design mirrors the massive sarcophagus of Pakal the Great next door, but where his tomb lid is famously adorned with carvings of celestial rebirth. Hers is restrained. Here, the focus lies not on storytelling, but on the remains, the red cinnabar, and the sacred process of death itself. Still, there are quiet clues woven into the structure. The chamber faces east to west, a symbolic alignment that traces the sun's journey across the sky. From dawn to dusk, life to afterlife. Though the space is small, it resonates with power. It feels intentional, private, holy, as if reserved for someone truly revered. To the Maya, temples weren't just buildings. They were cosmic tools, pathways between the heavens, the earthly realm, and the underworld. To be buried within one was not merely an honor. It was a spiritual elevation, a transformation of status. The Red Queen's tomb was no afterthought. It was a purpose-built sanctuary. Here, death wasn't a conclusion, but a metamorphosis. Her skeleton rests inside the stone. Her presence lingers in the cinnabar dust, and her memory is etched into the very architecture itself. This temple doesn't need to speak. because its silence already tells us she mattered. In Maya cosmology, death marked not an end, but a sacred crossing, a passage into the mysterious underworld called Xibalba. For the Red Queen, this wasn't just a spiritual transition, it was a ceremonial, cosmic, and political event, entrenched in belief and ritual. Funeral rites were carefully constructed acts, meant to guide the deceased through the shadowy layers of the afterlife. According to Maya texts and art, Xibalba wasn't a serene place. It was a place of darkness, danger, with blood-filled rivers, harsh trials, and gods who ruled over death. Only those who were properly prepared, both physically and spiritually, could complete the journey. The Red Queen was laid to rest within Cinnabar, sealed in stone, and surrounded by offerings, all marks of elite status. But there was more. The discovery of bone needles and obsidian blades suggests acts of auto-sacrifice, rituals that might have been part of her life, or enacted during burial to empower her soul. Her jade mask, meticulously arranged from small green tiles, wasn't just ornamental. It may have functioned as a spiritual vessel, preserving her identity, protecting her passage into the next realm. To the Maya, the face was the soul's reflection, and the soul needed to be recognized by the gods. Ceramic jars placed around her likely once held chocolate, maize drinks, water, or pulque, nourishment for her spiritual voyage. Other artifacts, like stingray spines or shell trumpets, may have symbolized sacred tools, calls to the divine, or relics of ceremonial power. For the Maya, burial wasn't a farewell. It was a sacred transformation. Death was like planting a seed. The tomb was the soil, and the soul reborn. Rulers, in particular, were believed to be divine on earth, and in death they returned to the gods. So when the Red Queen was buried, her body coated in red like blood, entombed within a sacred pyramid, and honored with offerings, she wasn't being laid to rest. She was being reborn, not as a mortal, but as a soul woven into the sacred fabric of the cosmos. Her death did not end her story. It began her legend. Just a few steps away from where she lies is one of the most celebrated tombs in ancient Mesoamerica, the burial of Kinich Ab Pakal, better known as Pakal the Great. His resting place, deep within the Temple of the Inscriptions, is famed for its magnificent scale, its spiritual depth, and its rich artistic expression. But what makes the Red Queen's tomb truly remarkable is not only what was buried within it. The sarcophagus of the Red Queen was hidden inside Temple 3, positioned directly next to Pakal's monumental shrine. In a city like Palenque, where every temple was built to reflect cosmic order, such proximity was no accident. It was intentional, a message etched into the city's stone. Many scholars argue the Red Queen was Tiziakbuajah, Pakal's wife and trusted royal companion, though her tomb bears no inscription. The similarities in their interments are striking. Both were covered in cinnabar, both entombed within pyramids, both adorned with jade artifacts, and both treated with the utmost reverence. These burial rituals seem to mirror one another, as if they were two chapters in the same sacred epic. Pakal's sarcophagus famously features him descending into the underworld tree, a visual tale of death and cosmic renewal. The Red Queen's tomb lacks such carvings, but its symbolism lies not in pictures, but in proximity. If Pakal embodied the sun's nightly journey through the underworld, Then the Red Queen might symbolize the moon, a feminine force that charts its own mysterious path through the sky. Together they represented cosmic balance. Sun and moon, king and queen, male and female, order and ceremony. In Maya belief, rulership wasn't meant to be solitary. It was relational, requiring harmony to reflect the balance of the cosmos. This harmony extended to the royal court. Placing the Red Queen's resting place beside Pakel's wasn't just about honoring their marriage. It was a declaration of dual power. In life, she may have ruled beside him. In death, she lay beside him still. Not as an afterthought, but as an equal part of a shared legacy. Even now, their tombs whisper without speech. Two spirits wrapped in stone and red dust, joined forever in one of history's most sacred silences, though her identity has been erased by time. The Red Queen of Palenque lives on, not as a forgotten figure, but as one of the most compelling and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, hidden for over 13 centuries, now echoes across the ages, its mysteries growing louder with each discovery. She is a riddle still unsolved. We may never know exactly who she was. No glyph names her. No monument tells her tale. Yet the dignity of her burial, the richness of her offerings, and the symbolic red of her remains all reveal a figure of immense importance. Not just a queen, but a woman with true power, sacred stature, and royal blood. Today, the Red Queen challenges the way we see ancient history. She reminds us that Maya women were not silent background figures. They led rituals, governed cities, and shaped dynasties. For too long, kings like Pakel have taken center stage. But her rediscovery proves that power ran through queens, mothers, priestesses, and visionaries alike. Her impact isn't only in the treasures she left behind. It lives in the conversations she started, among archaeologists, historians, and artists. Every jade ornament, every layer of cinnabar, every architectural detail in Temple 3 speaks to one simple truth. This woman mattered. And maybe the most remarkable part of her story isn't what we've uncovered, but what we still haven't. The Red Queen reminds us that history isn't just a timeline of facts. It's a living mystery, a shared human yearning to reconnect with the past. In that way, her story isn't over. It's still being written. She lies enshrouded in red, the color of life, of blood, of sacred renewal. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now looks out at us. Through science, through art, through all. She remains unnamed, but not unheard. She is enigmatic, but never forgotten. The Red Queen may have held a crown in her lifetime, but in death, she reigns over something far more eternal: our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone. Her history was written in silence. And yet, she speaks. That house would later become more than a home. A refuge, a place of conflict, and eventually a museum honoring one of the 20th century's most legendary artists. Frida was the third of 4 sisters born to Guillermo Callo, a Hungarian-German photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic with both indigenous and Spanish ancestry. Her parents were dramatically different. Guillermo was thoughtful and cerebral, Matilda deeply religious and emotionally distant. From her father, Frida inherited a reflective nature and artistic sensibility. From her mother, a powerful inner strength. As a young girl, Frida was creative, daring, and outspoken. She devoured books and posed questions that made many adults uncomfortable. At age 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. A difference she hid beneath long skirts, but never allowed to dampen her spirit. Confined to bed for months and isolated from her peers, Frida grew closer to her father during this time. He encouraged her to stay active, ride bikes, and sharpen her intellect. Unlike most girls of her generation, Frida had no desire to be just a wife or housekeeper. Her ambition was to become a doctor. At 15, she was accepted into Mexico City's elite national preparatory school, one of very few girls to make it in. There, she stood out for more than her intelligence. Her wit was sharp, her politics bold, and her style entirely her own. She became part of a circle of radical thinkers and students known as the Cachuchas, who spent their time debating literature, politics, and philosophy. Frida gravitated toward revolutionary thought, toward challenging the systems that defined her world, even long before the bus crash that would scar her body, or the fame that would frame her name. Frida Kahlo was already carving herself into the world, unfiltered, assertive, and far too unique to be shaped by anyone else's expectations. She wasn't simply growing up in Coacán. She was beginning the lifelong project of becoming herself. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was violently split in two. The version of her that had been, and the version she was forced to become. That day, she boarded a wooden bus after school with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias. They were teasing, laughing, maybe even arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. Moments later, a streetcar slammed into the bus, and in a heartbeat, everything fractured into wreckage, metal, and silence. The crash was devastating. The streetcar crushed the bus against the wall, splintering it, flinging passengers into the air. Frida was pierced by an iron handrail. It entered through her left hip and exited at her pelvis. Her spine cracked in 3 places. Her right leg was broken in multiple spots. Her foot was dislocated. Her collarbone and ribs shattered. Her shoulder was torn from its socket. Her abdomen was punctured. She was only 18. Someone covered her with a borrowed coat. Another person noticed her body shimmered. Not from blood, but from gold powder she had been carrying. It had burst on impact, dusting her broken body in glitter like ash. She was taken to the Red Cross hospital and endured numerous surgeries. Weeks passed in a body cast, lying flat on her back, fighting infection and uncertainty. Her dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away with every agonizing day. But in that still, quiet pain, something else began to stir. Her father gave her paintbrushes. Her mother rigged a special easel that hung over her bed. A mirror was placed above her, so she could look at herself. And so, encased in plaster and torment, Frida began to paint. At first, just to pass time. But soon, painting became a necessity. Her first subjects were her own image, because that was all she could see. But the result wasn't vanity. It was survival. The crash had shattered her body, but it had opened a door, a portal into herself. And through that opening emerged a surreal, painful, and deeply personal art style. One that gave language to everything she had lost, and everything she had found within the pain. The girl who had dreamed of healing others now began to heal herself, one painting at a time. That was exactly her purpose. Frida didn't create gentle florals or polite scenery. She painted pain, Her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her early focus was herself, not from ego, but because, as she once famously said, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her initial artworks were modest in size, done on metal or wooden surfaces, taking inspiration from Mexican retablos, small devotional pieces, meant to tell stories of suffering and divine intervention. But Frida internalized that tradition. Her own body became the sacred image, her emotions the spiritual offering. She depicted herself split open, pierced, and bleeding. In one painting, she's pierced with nails, resembling a saint in torment. In another, she floats in a desolate wasteland, her spine replaced by a crumbling pillar, a direct metaphor for the fractures in her back. She portrayed herself crying, dismembered, exposed, but never submissive. Her gaze always met the viewer's. Her agony was not prettied up. She rendered the horror of trauma with raw beauty, defiance, and even dark humor. Each painting was a reclaiming of her body, her suffering, and her place as a woman in a world that tried to confine her. Yet Frida was doing more than recounting her own life. She was forging a new visual language, one that fused folk traditions, surrealism, anatomical diagrams, and deep symbolism. Her art became a dreamlike autopsy of the soul, drenched in Mexican culture, color, and mythology. By the time she could walk again, although with difficulty, Frida was no longer the girl who had once aimed to be a physician. She had become a painter, and her work was like nothing anyone had seen before. She had taken her greatest trauma and transformed it into a source of creative fire. Frida Kahlo didn't just portray suffering. She forced the world to witness it, and in doing so, turned agony into a sacred act of self-definition. In 1928, still in recovery, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida met the man who would become both the love and the torment of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years older, already the most celebrated painter in Mexico, towering in height and influence. Rivera was a colossus in the world of Mexican muralism, renowned for his grand, politically charged murals that told the story of Mexico's people. Frida had seen his murals before and admired them. Now she wanted his opinion on her own work. She brought a few paintings to the Ministry of Education, where Rivera was working high on scaffolding. Unapologetically, she called up to him. "Do I have talent?" He glanced at her art and responded, "Yes, and I don't say that out of kindness." He saw something raw and real in her, a voice unfiltered, brimming with anger, sarcasm, pain, and beauty. They began a relationship that was intense and consuming. Frida once remarked, "I suffered 2 serious accidents in my life. One was when a streetcar hit me. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, an odd couple to most. Diego, massive in frame, politically famous, and chronically unfaithful. Frida, sharp-witted, independent, already limping with a cane. Her parents famously called their marriage a union between an elephant and a dove. Their love was passionate, but volatile. Diego supported her art and encouraged her to grow as a painter. But he was frequently unfaithful, even sleeping with her younger sister, Cristina. Devastated, Frida sought solace in her own affairs, with both men and women. She was rumored to have had romances with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe, among others. They divorced in 1939. A year later, they remarried, on new terms. Frida kept her independence, her money, her house, her name. Their second union was less about traditional romance and more about artistic collaboration and emotional understanding. Despite the infidelities and heartbreak, Diego remained a foundational figure in Frida's life. He challenged her, hurt her, but also believed in her. As an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman capable of reshaping art itself, they were never peaceful. But together they became legends. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego Rivera on a journey to San Francisco. Frida followed Diego Rivera as he moved to Detroit and New York, completing large-scale mural commissions. These years abroad brought her face to face with the harsh reality of American industrialism, excessive wealth, and the paradoxes of capitalism. Frida, a fierce Mexican nationalist, a loyal communist, and an admirer of indigenous culture, was deeply unsettled by what she saw: the extravagant lifestyle in the United States, especially during the Great Depression. When so many were suffering, only deepened her political disillusionment. In letters back home, she criticized the culture's obsession with materialism and appearances. She missed Mexico's color, its rawness, its contradictions. While Diego was busy painting giant murals on factory walls, Frida turned inward, creating quieter revolutions. Small, intimate pieces painted on tin and canvas. Her style began to take a sharper shape, surreal, emotional, deeply personal. It was during this time that she produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity. She painted herself to endure, to process, to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body in constant pain from the accident, numerous surgeries, and a miscarriage in Detroit, she looked inward. Her portraits revealed her body, bleeding, broken, and bare, but her face always calm, direct, and unapologetic. One of her most searing works, Henry Ford Hospital, depicts her weeping on a hospital bed, surrounded by surreal symbols. A fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a shattered pelvis. It was visceral, graphic, and unapologetically raw. A canvas drenched in truth. When Frida returned to Mexico, she plunged into leftist politics. She and Diego even opened their home to Leon Trotsky, who was living in exile. She dressed in Tehuana garments, indigenous clothing rich in history, not just as a style statement, but as a declaration of her cultural and political identity. Her art was never separated from her beliefs. Her body, her identity, and her ideology were all tangled together on the canvas. While Diego painted political murals of revolution, Frida painted its human consequences. A mind on fire, a body in agony, a soul confronting itself. In her pain, in her exile, Frida became not just an artist of suffering. She became an artist of resistance. When Frida returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer simply Diego Rivera's wife. She had become something greater, a creative force whose work radiated with unfiltered honesty, mythical symbolism, and Mexican identity. At home, she flourished. Her Casa Azul in Coacan became a personal sanctuary. Bright cobalt walls, yellow borders, Aztec statues in the garden. Monkeys and parrots wandered freely through the rooms. The house became a mirror of her imagination, a fusion of tradition and rebellion, grace and rawness. She surrounded herself with pre-Columbian sculptures, folk art, religious trinkets, and revolutionary texts. She wore floral crowns, long Tehuana dresses, and painted amid the scent of copal incense and the sound of mariachi bands drifting in from the streets. This was a time of explosive creativity. Her paintings grew more complex, more symbolic, more politically charged. In The Two Fridas, she split herself into two figures. One in a European dress, heart exposed and bleeding. The other in indigenous clothing, strong and self-contained. It was a portrait of identity torn between love, pain, and cultural heritage. In 1939, her work was showcased in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Kandinsky, and André Breton celebrated her originality. Yet even among the surrealists, Frida stood alone. When Breton tried to label her as a surrealist, she corrected him. "They thought I was a surrealist, but I'm not. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Her art wasn't fantasy. It was Mexico, not the romanticized version, but the living, bleeding, beautiful chaos she loved. Her works pulsed with skeletons, hummingbirds, thorns, hearts, corn, and blood. They honored indigenous heritage and exposed the wounds of colonialism and modern injustice. But even as her artistic voice became louder, her body weakened. She endured more surgeries, more pain, more illness. And still, she painted. Lying in bed, her torso confined by corsets, hands wrapped tightly around her brush. Frida had come back to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her voice through her art, through activism, and through an unflinching embrace of her identity. As the 1940s advanced, Frida Kahlo's body continued to fail her. Her spine was deteriorating. Her right leg suffered repeated infections. Over her lifetime, she endured more than 30 surgeries, often in exhausting succession. At times, she was confined to bed for months, bound in body casts or stretched apart by traction gear. Yet still, she kept painting. Each canvas became both a form of release and a declaration of defiance. Her work in these years took on a starker, sharper tone, stripped of metaphor, fueled by physical suffering and emotional clarity. In The Broken Column, she depicted herself split in two, her body pierced by nails, a fractured column replacing her spine, and yet her expression remained steady, her gaze unwavering. For Frida, pain was no longer just a theme. It had become her constant companion, her rival, her inspiration. Her political passion also intensified. She rejoined the Mexican Communist Party, participated in protests, wrote fierce letters, and called out imperialism with unapologetic clarity. Even when illness confined her to a wheelchair, she attended demonstrations, boldly holding placards, chanting slogans, her voice loud even as her body weakened. In 1953, Frida was finally honored with her first solo art show in Mexico, a long overdue recognition. Her doctors insisted she couldn't attend. Frida, however, had other plans. She arrived by ambulance, carried on a stretcher into the gallery, and laid in her hospital bed amid her artwork. Dressed in vibrant traditional attire, greeting admirers with tequila, laughter, and burning spirit. Her final works were a mix of childlike innocence and raw despair. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she portrayed herself in a steel brace, cradled by the hands of Marx, casting away icons of oppression. Her last known painting was a still life of sliced watermelons. One piece inscribed with the words, "Viva la vida, long live life." Even facing death, Frida was joyful, defiant, and resolutely political. Her final artworks were not mere portraits. They were revolutions painted in agony but signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at age 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same home where she had been born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause of death was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered something deeper. Yes, she was sick, but also exhausted by the unending battle with her body. Just days before, she had forced herself to attend an anti-CIA protest against the coup in Guatemala, frail, in her wheelchair, her fist raised high. Revolution was still the last thing her heart beat for. Her final diary entry was both sharp and sorrowful. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's highest cultural temple. Her casket was draped in the red communist flag, watched over by family, friends, artists, and political allies. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, even though his betrayals had once broken her. But in the years after her passing, something incredible happened. Frida Kahlo refused to be forgotten. Initially, her name circulated only in niche art communities. Her work was hard to categorize, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for traditional critics. But slowly, her image, her story, and her unapologetic fire began to echo. In the 1970s and 1980s, as feminists and scholars sought to recover silenced voices, Frida's name became a rallying cry. She was no longer just a painter. She had become a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican pride, fierce and unfiltered, of queerness, disability, and revolutionary truth. Her unibrowed gaze, her flower-crowned hair, her piercing stare, they became global icons. Her house became a museum. Her diary became sacred text. Her paintings hung in the greatest galleries in the world. Though Frida had lived in Diego's shadow, in death, she stepped into her own sun. She didn't just leave behind artworks. She left behind a mirror, daring us all to look. Not with pity, not with fear, but with flame. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere, on shirts, in murals, as dolls, memes, and emblems. Her image is iconic. But her legacy? That's deeper. What makes her unforgettable isn't that we recognize her face. It's that we recognize the truth behind it. Frida never claimed perfection. She didn't fit into tidy categories, and she never wanted to. In a world that demands polish, she offered truth. Truth that was messy, vivid, raw, angry, joyful, and human. She celebrated her difference, her disability, her queer identity, her radical politics, and her indigenous roots, turning each into a bold work of art. She became more than a painter. She became a global emblem of rebellion, feminism, and fearless authenticity. To queer people, she's a bisexual icon, unashamed and powerful, living openly in a time when silence was expected. To women, she's proof that authority doesn't need permission. To disabled creators, she's a sign that pain can be channeled, not censored. To Mexico, she's a reclaimed daughter, folkloric, passionate, and eternally tied to the soul of the nation. Her art, once dismissed as too personal or strange, now ranks among the world's greatest. Paintings like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column are more than visual, they are emotional landscapes, felt deeply by anyone who has ever turned pain into purpose. Frida lived on the fringes and turned the margins into a spotlight. She embodied contradiction. A communist in gold jewelry, a betrayed woman who chose love again, a shattered body with an indestructible soul. And through it all, she painted. not just with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She just told her truth. And in doing so, she gave voice to millions who had never seen themselves in art before. Now, when we look at her face, we see more than a woman. We see courage. We see fire. We see Frida. Not gone, but eternal.